Today in science, we're going to make sure that we've got a good understanding of what we've studied in Chapter 8 on substances, mixtures, and solubility. So we're going to take a look at our chapter review and specifically focus on our vocabulary acquisition. In this first portion of our vocabulary review, it asks us to match the terms in column 2 with the definitions in column 1. Write the letter of the correct term in the blank at the left. So we're going to match these definitions with the terms. Number 1. The term used to describe how much solute dissolves in a given amount of solvent. When it's talking about how much, we're talking about solubility. In lesson 2, we learned all about solubility, which is a substance's ability to dissolve in a solvent. We learned about the factors that go into it, but the term of how much solute dissolves in a given amount is solubility. So number 1 is L. Number 2 describes a solution that contains a large amount of solute per given amount of solvent. Number 2, talking about a large amount of something that's dissolved would be talking about the factor of concentration. If you have a higher concentration of something, there's a larger amount of it. Therefore, when you're talking solubility of solvents dissolved in a solute, you've got a higher concentration or concentrated solution. This is letter D. Letter D for number 2. Number 3, substance that does the dissolving. Substance that does the dissolving is all the way down here. That's the solvent. I know it's sometimes confusing because you say solute, solvent, solute, solute, go back and forth, but the substance that does the dissolving is the solvent. Number 4, interaction that occurs between acids and bases in which the properties of each are canceled out by the other. That's the process of neutralization. Because those acids and bases come back together, they can actually form a water molecule, and water is considered neutral. We call that neutralization. Number 5, substance that produces hydroxide ions when they dissolve in water. Now here's the difference between bases and acids. One produces hydronium, one produces hydroxide. Which one produces hydroxide ions? If you have to look back, this is your bases. Your OH negative is your hydroxide ion. Number 6, solutions in which water is the solvent. If water is the solvent, because water is called the universal solvent, it actually has the ability to dissolve both ionic and covalent type solutions to turn those into something that actually still dissolves, either molecular or ionic. We call that an aqueous solution. 6 is B, aqueous. 7, a measure of how acidic or basic solution is or are. That would be, let's take a look here, pH, J. Our pH is the scale that measures how acidic or basic solution is. It goes from 0 to 14. We know that 0 to 6 is acidic. We know that 8 to 14 is basic, and we know that 8 or 7 right in the middle is neutral. Number 8, another name for a homogeneous mixture. Homogeneous means that it is the same throughout. That would be another name for that would be a solution. Number 8 is N, a solution. Number 9 tells how much solute is present compared to the amount of solvent. This is going to be not concentrated, but E, concentration. So when it has a high amount of something, we can say it's concentrated. When you're trying to just measure the comparison between those two, it's called concentration. Number 10, compounds that react with acids or basic solutions to produce certain colors. Sometimes when you don't know what something is, you can use this specific type of item to try and find or indicate what it is. That should give away the answer there. For number 10, we're talking an indicator. Number 10 is G. 11, describe a solution that contains all of the solute that it can hold under a given set of conditions. If we're talking about the maximum amount of solvent, that's going to be something that's called saturated. Because then you keep pouring sugar into the water, you keep stirring it because you want to make this Kool-Aid recipe with a ton of sugar. Eventually that sugar is going to stop dissolving, and we call that solution saturated. Number 12, substance that dissolves into a solution. Not the solvent, but the M solute. 13, combinations of substances that can be separated by physical processes. So if it's separated by a physical process, that means there hasn't been a chemical reaction to put those things together, and they're simply just mixed together. That probably gives away that answer. If they're just mixed together, then it's a mixture, H. Number 14, contains a relatively small amount of solute per given amount of solvent. If a large amount was concentrated, what would a small amount considered to be? That would be F, dilute. F is dilute. Number 14 is dilute, something that doesn't have a large amount of concentration. For example, if I'm concerned about giving my kids too much sugar in something that they're drinking, I could put water into it. So instead of giving them like pure juice that has a ton of sugar in it, I could split it with water and cut that down and dilute it in that example. Or Mr. Shane shared with you when he worked for the city of Clintonville and had to clean with the hydrochloric acid, we poured water in it to dilute it because it was so strong it could eat through and eat away concrete. It was that dangerous and acidic. We had to dilute it. That means put more water into it so there's a relatively small amount of the solute in the water or in the solvent. Number 15, containing hydrogen and producing hydronium ions when they dissolve in water. Obviously, if you've done this correctly, you've crossed out the ones that you've used so far, and you know that we've talked about hydroxide ions. We have not talked about hydronium ions in this case. They produce hydronium ions. That's going to be A, acids. Thanks for reviewing with me all of the vocabulary terms that we learned throughout this chapter. Thanks for sticking around. God's blessings.